All right, folks. Enthusiasm is palpable. I see it just flushed out the room. A lot of bright faces, shining eyes, just like, I don't care. It's 9:30 in the morning. I am ready to learn auditing. Yes. So, obviously it'll be facetious, but I'm excited about today. We get to talk about FTX. So, I think we talked about FTX to some degree back in Advanced AIS, and I tried to make sure that we talked about some different stuff this time, but FTX is one of my favorite companies just because it's kind of recent. It happened back in November 2022, and there's a lot of information that's come out about it since then. So it still has kind of the freshness of Enron back in Enron in the early 2000s. You can talk about it, and there's still more things to find out about it. And I originally did this case in spring of 2023, and the Troutman paper was still a working paper back then, the one that we're working with, and they developed it quite a bit after that. But then Michael Lewis actually published his book, Going Infinite, which a few people in this course read as part of some assignments that I did last year. But I actually really enjoyed the book. The one thing that came from the book that just blew my mind is that it talked about the accounting several times in the book, and then the lackadaisical approach they had to accounting. And I was just thinking to myself, if they had one qualified accountant on staff, this whole thing may have never happened. This whole blow up may have never happened. So present you my meme number one, okay? And so you remember Parks and Recreation when there's at Entertainment 720 and Ben's talking to Tom, says you need to have detailed financial records. Sam Bankman-Fried's like, you know what we're doing? Don't forget to grab a free tungsten cube on your way in. And so do you remember that scene from Parks and Recreation? Tom's actually, they're giving away free iPads, him and John Raphael. And I changed that with tungsten cube because that's actually a meme among crypto bros, I guess is what they talked about, crypto professionals, about tungsten cubes. And so that was a joke. I put those on Facebook. I got like 2 likes. I thought it was really clever, but that's my joy of FTX memes. But we're not done because we got plenty of memes for FTX to talk about today. So just as a refresher, one of the reasons this is so important is that crypto assets are starting to become omnipresent. We're starting to see the presence of these just everywhere. Now, whether or not you view these as traditional investment vehicles or viable investment vehicles, which I know that there are certain people in the room who do not, mostly me and Matt. And but whether you do or not, this is something that we're going to have to face in the near future. And so we need to be a little bit aware of what it is we're facing. So refresher back what we talked about in Advanced AIS and some things that you should already be aware of is that back in December 2023, the Financial Accounting Standards Board issued a standard on crypto assets. Now, does everybody remember what the treatment for they proposed is? Because we talked about this as about a case in 2023. We talked about the different ways that it could be viewed. But does anybody remember the final treatment that we settled upon? So if you remember, and hopefully you don't forget this one this time, but so recall that we talked about how it could be any number of things, but they eventually settled on it's going to be intangible assets. But they're intangible assets that are susceptible to changes in fair value. So effectively, it's an investment, but it's being called an intangible asset. And that's the Financial Accounting Standards Board. They find something new and says, well, let's take a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, mush them together, and voila, crypto asset. Accounting treatment for crypto assets. So that was something that they came up with, and I don't know how long this will hold. There's definitely some issues with this particular association. But this is kind of what we got going forward. Now, keep in mind, this was all before the FTX, or after the FTX debacle. The FTX debacle occurred before this. So the accounting issues were going to be prevalent in the fact that this is fairly unregulated, and there's a lot of problems in the industry already. But this kind of provides some clarification. Now, why is this so important? It's because if there was not really clear key guidance on how this should be treated, how did the accounting work for FTX? And the answer is not very well. All right. And hopefully you all picked that up from the research that you were picking or you were looking at. I did have you look at the paper, and the paper was very, very dry. It was very technical. It was very, very detailed, and it provided the key information I want you to look for. But if you just go online and look at FTX accounting, you can find a number of different things that are just kind of crazy. So one of my favorite sites, I think I mentioned it many, many times to you. And the good news is this is probably the last time for most of you that you'll hear me refer to this site. Goingconcern.com. I actually had a series of articles about this, and one of them talks about the name of the article is be glad you didn't have FTX as a client. All right, so yeah, that's not a good thing for an auditor to hear right there. But I really like some of the things that are talked about. Say, internal communication aside in the report, Bankman-Fried said one says FTX sister company Alameda was hilariously beyond any threshold of any auditor being able to even get partially through an audit. Now, if you're trying to talk about a financial responsibility, which is the way audit was supposed to be referred to, and trying to actually determine accountability, and the owner of the company says, yeah, this company is not auditable. And he actually provides clarification. He says, Alameda is unauditable. I don't mean in the sense of a major accounting firm will have reservations about audit. I mean in the sense of we are only able to ballpark what its balances are, let alone something like a comprehensive transaction history. All right. This is a memo that Sam Bankman-Fried wrote. But sometimes find 50 million of assets lying around and lost track of. Such is life. I know that, sometimes when I'm wandering around the house, and I pick up a box on a corner and I've just got like $50 million of cash lying around in the corner. I was like, wow, can't believe I lost track of that. Such is life, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of the accounting treatment. Now, this all makes sense if you know anything about kind of the players in the company. They were very, very big picture individuals. They were very, very high level individuals. They were saying, we want to kind of affect the world in a macro way, which is laudable. It's an admirable goal. But as accountants, as you all have been learning over the past 4 to 5 years, the details do matter. All right, the details do matter. And this was a group of individuals who were not very focused on details. They were very focused on big picture. And so if you focus on the big picture, you kind of lose the point. So it's like, yeah. All sorts of lessons where you can talk about life lessons where you can talk about not paying attention to the details and seeing everything fall apart. So yeah, we do have to make sure that we're very clear on the details. So I do like this last paragraph. According to the report, Matt Alameda struggled to understand what its own positions were, let alone hedging or accounting for them. In one example reference to the report, employees were told by an unidentified manager in June 2022 to just come up with some numbers. IDK. Okay. Now I'm a bit old, but I do know what IDK stands for, and I don't, and I don't know. Yeah, it's actually what it stands for, but it's one of those things that I would get on to you if you send me an email about this and just abbreviated IDK. It says okay, shorthand. Why are you doing shorthand in an official professional email to me? But the company is actually saying IDK. Just make up some numbers, whatever it works. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about the individual named John Ray here in just a second. I do want to talk a little bit about it. It's a little bit talked about in the paper, and I'm trying to remember where it's at. Oh yeah. The conclusion is that FTX had not that FTX had poor controls, but no controls. All right. And that was alluded to by John Ray. He talked about the biggest organizational failure, internal controls. And if you remember, we talked about him back in Advanced AIS, and we said John Ray was he was the CEO, bankruptcy CEO for what other very famous organization? Does anybody remember that?
Ray-Ban.
What's that?
Ray-Ban.
I think it was for Ray-Ban actually, but yeah, no. Giant E, Enron. He actually handled the bankruptcy as CEO for Enron. But yeah, he was. So when you're comparing to Enron and saying that this is the worst the worst failure in internal controls you've ever seen, and the standard by which you actually judge that is Enron, you know that there's a problem there. Okay. The FTX group control failures in environments, dependable employees, among them virtually limits power to direct transfers of fiat currency and crypto assets to hire and fire employees with no effective oversight or controls to access checks how they exercise those powers. And so this is just one of those things you think about. It'd be great to be able to run the world and make lots and lots of money, but when the reality comes crashing down, there are responsibilities that work in this regard. Okay, so here's where we're going to kind of go into the details here, and I wanted you all to look in depth at some of the areas of thoughts with respect to these questions. I didn't ask you a lot of questions because one, I want you all to have some fun with the meme, which we'll talk about in a second, and two, I want you to actually drill down and answer these questions with some thoughtfulness, because these were not just these were not kind of the same model questions that I've been using in other cases. So let's start out. Briefly describe FTX's business model and corporate structure. What was FTX's model and structure consistent with that of other companies its size? Is it reasonable to assume that any deviations between FTX and its peers was due to unique nature of cryptocurrency trading? So our group one leader is Sydney. What did your group come up with?
Said the corporate structure didn't really exist, there was no corporate governance because board of directors was not independent, and they didn't have internal control structure. Business model was primarily sourced transaction fees. Their core product was Bitcoin derivatives, and it was a complex and unorganized structure.
So basically, the answer to this, when I say briefly describe the FTX's corporate structure, the answer is IDK. IDK, yeah, okay. Gonna be a common answer here, yeah. So no real organization to speak of. Sam Bankman-Fried basically made all the operating decisions, and he didn't really provide any guidance as how to carry those out. He said, like I said, he was very big picture. He said, I want this done, and it was something that it was going to get done, but nobody really knew how. There was no structure for getting things done. No oversight, no real corporate governance to speak of, lack of controls. Do we think this was due to the unique nature of cryptocurrency trading, or do we think that this is just because this was a bunch of people who really didn't know how to run a business, and they didn't really put the effort into trying to determine that? Probably the latter to some degree. I think that then we could make some arguments that crypto asset trading and something like FTX is going to have a fairly unique business model, but not so unique that will basically bypass all corporate governance and internal control features. So certainly some concerns. So it's important to note that they were notably complex. They had over 130 affiliate indices in their bankruptcy filing. So that's really, really hard to track when we talk about the size of the organization, because it was a $33 billion bankruptcy, or sorry, $167 billion bankruptcy. Sam Bankman-Fried lost $33 billion. So yeah, some concerns that we talked about with respect to how it was similar to other financial tech companies. It did focus on the technology-driven financial services, but there were notable deviations. One of the big ones had to do with this relationship with Alameda Research, which we can tell was a real problem based on the context of the questions that we're going to talk about moving forward. It's kind of the same thought as if you were on the New York, or you were the one who was operating the New York Stock Exchange, but you actually traded on the New York Stock Exchange and kind of had insider information. Insider trading is heavily frowned upon, but given the unique nature of cryptocurrency, nobody really had any regulatory insight into this. And Alameda were doing some things that were kind of in its own self-served interest. Not to mention the problems of the fact that it was being leveraged to the hilt, but more on that shortly. All right, so yeah, moving to question number 2. What was FTX's relationship with Alameda Research? What risks were presented by Alameda's asset holdings of FTX tokens, or the FTX tokens, which have FTT? What risks were present by FTX financing Alameda with FTX customer assets? Tyler, I've given you some easy questions in the past. This is not an easy question, so hopefully your group did some due diligence and came up with this one. What did you guys come up with on this? It is a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so we said FTX was basically a sister company of Alameda.
Alameda.
Alameda. Anyways, and there was also, they were doing business. Basically, the risk was Alameda was having FTX cryptocurrency. No, Alameda had a significant portion of the FTX token supply, and also a main trader. So this created like an artificial market. And then also the risk of FTX financing Alameda with FTX customers' assets. So they were losing their own capital. And then I guess FTX inflating the valuation of Alameda assets. I'm getting worse. Oh my goodness, not knowing.
It's impressive, actually. Yeah.
So without the proper audits, the collapse of the two entity came when it was exposed that the financial position of Alameda was cheating.
Yeah. So there was a lot going on. So basically, FTX and Alameda were intertwined. All right. And Alameda had a very large stake of FTT tokens. Now, at its face value, this is not a real problem because they were positioned as a trader. Now, if you ignore the fact that they basically were a trading firm that was operating off of their sister trading platform and they had an inside scoop on some of this, if you ignore that, which is a pretty big give, if you ignore that, then the whole ownership of FTT is not a major issue, okay? Because this is something that they can use to trade and kind of pump up the value of the FTX naturally. I'm not talking about like a pump and dump scheme. There were some particular problems though. So one of the issues is that these FTT tokens, they were not really purchased by any with any value. They were just kind of created and given to Alameda Research by FTT. Now, the way that I characterize this is when we were doing some lessons, I'm doing a research project with another student, and the way that we characterize FTT tokens just basically be given to Alameda Research is imagine that you're playing poker, okay? You go into the casino and you sit down next to a guy, and the guy's kind of like, well, I own the casino. And then basically anytime he loses, he just takes more chips from the dealer, okay? You'd probably think that was a little bit unfair, all right? That was kind of the characterization. But it gets worse from there, all right? It gets a lot worse from there because Alameda was actually working with customer assets from FTX. FTX was transferring customer assets in Alameda's possession. So say that you own like 50 Bitcoin, which if you did, can we be friends? But you own 50 Bitcoin and you said, all right, I'm going to put this into the FTX exchange. FTX then transferred those 50 Bitcoin over to Alameda to trade with, all right? So what is this like? This is basically like that same individual who's playing poker at the table with you saying, well, I own the casino, which means I own your chips too. So basically when they go broke, they just start grabbing your chips and playing with those, all right? And then, then there's a little bit more, again, with the insight of the fact that they're trading on the same platform. The idea being is that they've got an unfair advantage because they can actually see the trends and the negotiations that are going on. And so it's a little bit like knowing what the cards are that everybody's being held at the playing table. So I realize that's a really silly analogy, but it's kind of an effective way to think about the unfair impact and what was happening. And kind of combined that with all the loose accounting standards and everything that was going on there, it's just kind of a recipe for disaster. So yeah, basically the whole thing kind of came falling apart when FTT or FTX experienced what was called a bank run. Is everybody familiar with the term bank run? So the idea is that people panic and they say, I want to withdraw all my funds. And so FTX was not a bank in the traditional sense, but they still held currencies, and people are saying, I want my currency back. I'm a little nervous. And then $8 billion occurred in one transaction the one day, and FTX said, we can't handle that. We quit. And so, yeah, that was kind of the problem, is that because they were being held in Alameda's portfolio and they didn't have access to them, they couldn't actually meet customer demand for this. All right, so here's the fun part. And so I gave Tyler the really difficult question, which he handled like a champ, okay? I'm going to give Leah, this is going to be the fun question, okay? So I want you to have fun with this, Leah, all right? How did John Ray characterize corporate controls in place at FTX? And based on your research, do you agree with Ray's assessment? Why or why not? What's your group say?
Well, I thought his little quote was pretty. Siri would like to answer as well. What he said was like, never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information has occurred here. So I felt like he was very dramatic, but for good reason. We agreed with his assessment. There was basically no controls in place. We also came out some of the key control issues were commingling, lack of segregation of duties, bad risk management, and obviously deficiency in record keeping and accounting.
Yeah, so it's really hard for us to basically say, let's see if we can identify the control failures. Because as it said in that going concern article, there basically were no controls. It's basically, it's effectively like just existing in a state of nature. So just you think about our early ancestors when they were going out and they were kind of new to the world, and they got like attacked by a saber-tooth or a tiger or something like that. And you're thinking, we should probably address that particular problem because we don't want to continue getting eaten by the wildlife. So they started living in caves and trying to hide themselves. Back then, they were identifying that there were controls in place that they could do to reduce risk. This is basically an environment where, like they said, we're just going to ignore all controls and let everybody run free. Okay, it was the most convoluted mess that involved both capitalism and just hippie type living, communal living. It's like, all right, we want to make a lot of money, but we don't want the responsibility or chores of actually having to manage that money. So it was the most ridiculous thing. And I apologize to anybody who's a fan of hippies. I couldn't find a better adjective for that. So anyway, lack of control, and obviously the control problems exist at the top. What do we say at the very beginning of the COSO framework? Which, by the way, in a couple hours I get to talk to my AIS students, which we're going to be talking about their scores on the first exam, and I told them that they needed to know all 5 components of the COSO framework, which by now everybody in this course should know them by heart. What is the very top of that COSO framework? I hate you. No, okay, I'm sorry. just deliberately throwing out things that just throw me off. All right, control environment. Okay, and if the people in the top are not taking controls very seriously, why should anybody else? There was absolutely no chance. So I make the joke if they'd only had a good accountant there, but there was absolutely no chance that an accountant would have succeeded there because nobody there had any desire to make controls work in the organization. They were like, this is not my responsibility. This is the responsibility of somebody else. But if everybody's saying that, then there's nobody taking responsibility for anything. So certainly problematic. All right. Refer to the FTX working paper on Brightspace. How would you characterize the work performed by the external auditors FTX? And according to the SEC complaint, FTX audited financial statements and submitted information about its relations to Alameda. How should FTX auditors treat this omission of information? Colin, what do you think?
He said the work done by FTX's auditors was garbage. Dr. Barnes.
Is that the actual word that you used?
Yeah, he said,
wow. Okay. All right.
Dr. Barnes would not be proud. The auditors should have investigated and disclosed any related party transactions, including those with Alameda. And the auditors did not meet their responsibility to ensure that financial statements were free from misstatement. And they also did not ensure that they were fairly presented because they failed to address any omissions.
Yeah. So John Ray actually talked about how he's familiar with one of the auditors, but not familiar with the others auditors, and basically saying the auditors did not really provide any meaningful insights. That it's not appropriate for stakeholders to rely on the audit financial statements as a reliable indication of silos. Now, Alameda was just kind of left out. Now, we know Alameda had a very close relationship with FTX, but there's no actual disclosure of this in the financial information. Now, do we think that this kind of interesting point? Do we think that there was actually any intentional interference here? Do we think that in the reporting that people were saying that they're leading out, or is it mostly just kind of like, well, everybody already knows this already, so we don't have to disclose this information? I don't know what the real true answer is. Okay, I don't know if it was intentionally obfuscated or if it was just one of those things that they said, everybody knows this, so by reporting. But obviously, the auditors had a responsibility to say, this is an important business relationship. This does need to be disclosed in the financial statements. And so certainly problematic with that. How should FTX auditors have treated this mission information? They definitely should have been a lot more stern. They should have been a lot more detailed in that their approach to that. So certainly problematic. By the way, did anybody catch, I think this is something that we've talked about, if not in this course, we did talk about it in Advanced AIS. How was the majority of FTX's accounting work being done? Does anybody know the platform that we're using? Oracle, SAP, what the platform was?
The Excel sheet, wasn't it?
It was close. It's close. A little bit stronger than an Excel sheet, but not much. It was QuickBooks. Okay. So QuickBooks, very, very good if you're running a small restaurant with a few $1,000s of business operations a week in Kirksville, Missouri. Running a multi-billion-dollar company with millions of transactions daily, probably not so much. Okay. That being said, I do think that QuickBooks missed out on an opportunity. So my second meeting. All right. So QuickBooks, if it works for FTX, it'll work for you. All right. Well, there we go. All right. Sure. So yeah, certainly some problems when we talk about FTX. Now, I do not think that we're going to see something like this again in the near future, but the fact that a company like this could exist and could be so operationally successful at face value, that in retrospect, just basically say this is a mess, nobody had any idea what's going, does not give us a lot of confidence. And one of the key issues that we talk about that there's a very, very strong need for regulatory oversight in areas like this, particularly in the area of crypto exchanges and crypto asset trading. This is a little bit concerning given that the current environment we're operating in. We heard a little bit about that yesterday when we were talking to, we had the discussion with Ken Zico. He was talking specifically about healthcare regulation, but we talked about the environment that we're operating from a government perspective. Is regulation likely to become more or less pronounced in the near future? Less pronounced, far less pronounced because of the governmental efficiency, which I don't want to undercut governmental efficiency. I do believe that a core governmental efficiency is probably a really, really good idea, but there are some areas that definitely need to be regulated further and more detailed, and this is one of those areas. So I say that I don't think FTX could occur again, but then we had the Binance money laundering scheme just a year later, where CZ was hit with a $4.5 billion fine. So who knows what could happen. All right, this is the time that I've been waiting for. Now we're going to actually take a look at the memes, okay? So we're going to see what had. And so for anybody who wanted to know, I did say it was a prize. So I bought 3 $10 Starbucks gift cards for the winner. All right, so we'll see what happens here. All right. I've already chosen the winner, by the way. Just so if there's like a raucous roar, and everybody thinks something's a lot more funny than I did, then I'll explain my reasoning. So group one decided to like give me a assortment of memes. Okay, so their first meme. Going back with a very traditional meme, you know, the like old school meme of the guy looking at the girl walking by in the dress. And so, so there actually is a lot to admire about this meme. Okay, it's an oldie but a goodie. Plus, they actually went with kind of the excitement of somebody saying, "I just came up with a really clever idea." So I've got massive typos going on in the meme itself. Okay, which actually goes to the heart of traditional memes, because if you don't have a typo in a meme, is it really a meme? I mean, let's be honest. Okay. They didn't stop there, okay? So they provided a few more memes. So as far as the humor in the memes, I have to give us strong ones, but I do believe that there may have been some web searching and not some actual meme developments going on here. So that as much as I appreciate the group one's effort, we're going to move on to group 2 and group 3 and group 4. Okay. All right.
Decided that they're not winning.
This is group 2. Group 2. All right. Sam Bankman-Fried, Sam Bankman-Jail. I see I did there. Points for style for actually putting him next to Diddy. Okay. All right there. That's actually really impressive. Okay. Group 3 actually had a very similar theme. Okay. Group 3, named Bankman-Fried in prison and can't run a bank. And so, yeah, that's appropriate. So both will play on the bank names. Okay. So, yeah, some good solid stuff there. And group 4 decided to go with a golfing meme, which FTX lost in the FTX platform, sending the message to Alameda and the investors. Yeah. So yeah, I thought if you understood anything about golf, you probably did that. I do understand a little bit about golf. You'd probably appreciate that.
This one hits home.
Yeah. That's I'll tell you, though it's usually us ourselves, the investors, knocking our own balls into the lake. FTX decided to cut the middleman and do that for us. So on basis of the content of what would be appropriate for a meme for a seminar auditing class that actually hit the topic of financial analysis, investing, I do think groups 2 and 3 memes, they were actually pretty clever, but they were just play on words. But I have to give it to group 4 for actually hitting home. So group 4, you're going to be the winners. So congratulations. If those of you are just sad that you didn't win out the Starbucks gift cards, I apologize. Maybe you need to step up your meeting game. All right, we have a presentation starting on Monday, so I'll see you all then.
I think it would be fun.